Call the city council meeting
To order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilperson Felder.
Here.
Whitman.
Here.
Ikoangeli.
Here.
Binding.
Here.
Germaini.
Here.
Lamore.
Here.
Mayor Clark.
Here, I'd ask we all please rise for the invocation, remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Guide our working together. Give us wisdom to make the right decisions, your understanding to listen to each other, and your compassion to promote the welfare of the residents of this community.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk, first item, please.
Next item on the agenda are any amendments to the agenda.
Looking at administration, none. Any comments or questions from council on the agenda? See none. Next item, please.
The next item are citizen comments not related to an agenda item.
This time, if there's anyone present here this evening and wish to make comments not related to an agenda item, please come forward. State your name, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Scott Smiley, Monroe Fire Department. Just wanted to give an update on our Thanksgiving dinner we had last week. We had served over 50 turkeys, which came to over 950 meals that we passed out that night. And we just want to give thanks to everybody that donated and volunteered their time. It was a great thing. We got a lot of donations this year, and obviously a lot of turkeys, so it was a good thing. And then also coming up this weekend, we have our second annual Breakfast with Santa. This will be at the VFW Hall at 400 Jones Avenue. Time is from 9 to 12, and we're asking $3 donations, which includes pancakes, sausage, eggs, juice, and coffee. There'll be activities for the kids. They'll be able to meet Santa there, and all proceeds go to families we sponsor for Christmas. Last year, we sponsored 2 families. We gave them a Christmas meal and presents for the family, so we hope to see everybody out there.
Is that Saturday, you said?
Yes, this Saturday. December 7th.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Other comments from those present here this evening, not related to agenda item? Clerk, next item, please.
The next item is under council action, item 2609, support for MCOP's MSHDA Neighborhood Enhancement Grant application.
Thank you. I'll look to Mr. Pastou if there's some introduction. I see that Stephanie Kaspersak's here as well.
Thank you, Your Honor. We're requesting a city council support, resolution of support for an application to Michigan Housing Development Authority for MCOP related to a grant that would go toward some support for the Opportunity Center, the Summer Rankin Community Gardens, and to assist with housing projects as it relates to the Cultivate Community Program in the spring. So consistent with the council's commitment to reinvestment there at the Orchard East neighborhood, and we think it would go a long way toward continuing that improvement.
Thank you. I see the grant is $50,000 for eligible organizations for this programs. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Very good. Excellent.
Your Honor, I'll make a motion that we support the resolution relative to the MCOP's Neighborhood Enhancement Grant application to MSHDA.
Second.
There's like 3 of those. So there's a motion from Councilman Ikoangeli, supported by Councilwoman Vining on 2609, the MCOP's MSHDA Neighborhood Enhancement Grant application. Further comments? Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilperson Felder.
Yes.
Whitman.
Yes.
Ikoangeli.
Yes.
Binding.
Yes.
Germaini.
Yes.
Lamore.
Yes.
Mayor Clark.
Yes.
Thank you. Next item, please.
The next item is item 2614, consideration to approve development and purchase agreement with Great Lakes Opportunity Fund.
Mr. Pastou.
Thank you, Your Honor. City Administration is recommending approval of development and purchase agreement with Great Lakes Opportunity Fund related to the redevelopment of the former Lazy Boy headquarters site on North Telegraph. Many of the aspects of the agreement were reviewed last week with City Council during the work session. Contained in your packet was an agreement recommended for approval. I think there's a few minor changes. I'll have City Attorney Matt Butts just talk briefly about that.
Mr. Buds.
Your Honor, placed before you were clean and marked copies of the agreement showing just the minor number of comparisons that were made in the hours since the packet went out to council over the past week. A few items that I'll point out, I think all of them are largely non-substantive with the exception of one that I want to point out. There was some cleanup as far as references to exhibits. There was also a reference to property that the city owns that's located in Frenchtown Charter Township, which is just north of Greenfield. The idea has been in the discussion that those would largely be included. However, they cannot be included in any brownfield plan financing, and the city would have no jurisdiction over those two parcels as it relates to any approvals. So you'll see that there is a reference to the city owning that property. It'll be listed separately in an Exhibit A2. And there's a paragraph which is added in the marked version. It's in section 3, begins near the end of page 5, which basically points out that the idea is to have a consistent and homogeneous development, including that Frenchtown Township property, and on the condition that all other conditions of this agreement are met, that those would be included in the transfer to the developer, but with the indication that it's on up to the developer to get the necessary approvals from Frenchtown Township for any of that development, and that it cannot be included in any brownfield plan or related tax capture. So that's the one that I will call a significant change to the agreement. Others that are included throughout are to refer to the sub-area plans in a consistent way, referring to the MKSK sub-area plan and then defining that as the Lazy Boy sub-area plans throughout the agreement, calling that out specifically based on the some feedback that was received as far as the agreement is concerned. Others are just minor cleanup issues and again, reference to exhibits and things like that. So unless there are any questions about those? One other that I'll point out on page 10 of the marked version, we made some changes to make it from 4 meetings regarding infrastructure improvements to 3, which matches up with the Manick and Smith contract that City Council had previously approved. Unless there are any other questions, those are the brief changes that were made to the agreement from what you saw in the agenda pack.
Your Honor, I'd like to move that the development and purchase agreement for real estate with Great Lakes Opportunity Fund related to the redevelopment of the Lazy Boy headquarters be authorized, the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign the agreement, subject to final review and acceptance by the city attorney and the city manager.
Second.
Motion by Councilman Michelangelo, supported by Councilman Felder on item 2614 as stated. I'll just see if there's any other comments since we had changes in there. I think it was explained well. I think that actually reads well in some of those parts very well. Thank you. With that, clerk, please call the roll.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Next item, please.
The next item is item 2589, resolution to approve obsolete building rehab incentive at 101 West First Street.
Thank you, Mr. Pastu. I think we have some additional information also tonight.
Again, we've had this on the agenda last couple meetings. The resolution that you have was based on the initial recommendation of a 6-year incentive for the project at 101 West First. And subsequent to that, a revised application with additional investment identified, I think would have moved it to a 12-year. But the resolution you have in front of you is 6. Certainly, it's your discretion to change that before its adoption if you wish. But also, City Attorney Matt Buds had put together over the weekend a development agreement that would go along with this. And so if he could just take a moment to review that with you before you consider action on this item.
Thank you. Mr. Buds.
As you'll recall, this matter was before the council, I believe, 2 meetings ago, and there was discussion about use of a development agreement to try to outline some of the terms with the developer and the owner of this property. I apologize you did not have this sooner than you did as far as for review, but I tried to be as straightforward as possible. I'd be happy to walk through the sections. Essentially, this acknowledges that the company has applied for an Oprah certificate as far as this property is concerned, and that the city desires to have a written understanding of the company's obligations in connection with the redevelopment of that property, and that it will be done in accordance with all applicable laws, codes, ordinances, rules, regulations, or other requirements. There is a section 2 which requires the company to provide plans for the redevelopment of the property on or before a date certain, which we would include if this is deemed acceptable and if we proceed forward with a resolution for that Oprah certificate. I stated that the substance and form of the plans would be consistent with the form and substance required for review by Planning, Building, or the Historic District Commission. The redevelopment would be contemplated to be completed on or before December 31st of 2020, or 1 year after the effective date of any exemption certificate, whichever is later. We did have a comment about applicable rehabilitation and building codes, and said to the maximum extent possible, the city would utilize the rehabilitation code for existing buildings when evaluating the redevelopment for building permits or approvals, but that the company would be responsible for preparing and providing plans documenting the applicability of the rehabilitation code, or otherwise documenting compliance with applicable codes. The agreement states that the company would submit their plans and any other information requested by the HDC for review of the redevelopment in accordance with the Historic District Overlay Ordinance, and that approval of the HDC should be obtained prior to the commencement of the redevelopment. It states that the company will obtain all necessary permits for work associated with the redevelopment from the building department prior to the commencement of the work requiring the permit. And again, in overarching all applicable laws, codes, ordinances section would state that the term would commence on the date last executed by either the city or the company once both have signed, and would terminate 1 year after the termination, revocation, or other end of the effectiveness of the Oprah certificate. There's a provision that deals with default and states that in addition to any other legal remedies, that the city could revoke the Oprah certificate for violation of the provisions of this agreement. And then I will say the next several paragraphs are normal legal provisions regarding notice, waiver, entire agreement, and controlling law.
Thank you. Questions? I see there's a couple. I'll start with John, and I'll work back this way.
Your Honor, thank you. I think the framework of the development agreement is something that we should do from this point on with every Oprah request in terms of outlining the responsibilities of the applicant versus the responsibilities of the city. However, we do have a problem with this particular request. I am aware, based on conversations, that Mr. Wickenheiser submitted an application to the HDC, did not attend the Historic District Commission. I don't think that they rendered any type of recommendations or suggestions on the type of windows. And then shortly thereafter, he went ahead and installed the windows anyway. The other point that I want to make is that under the provisions of Public Act 146 of 2000, specifically Section 125.2788, Section 8.2D of the State Act, it says that the applicant shall, in writing, state that they will do no work on the building until the exemption certificate has been granted by the approving authority. And Mr. Wickenheiser has already proceeded with the improvements, even though the council has not approved the Oprah certificate. Now, I just want to say this. Mr. Wickenheiser, I appreciate his investment in the downtown. He's done a number of buildings. However, it also comes with the fact that sometimes he pushes the envelope, forcing the city into a position where, from a public relations point of view, it looks like we're prohibiting, or we're a barrier to redevelopment when we are not. Okay? And this is a classic example. Starting work before you get a certificate, and then coming and asking the city, not going to the HDC as the applicant, not following any of the requirements that an applicant should. So I'm of the opinion at this point in time that the city of Monroe should not be granting an obsolete property exemption to Mr. Wickenheiser at this point in time, because he has failed to comply with the intent of the state statute, which says you don't start any work until we have the ability to approve the exemption certificate. All right? Now, I want to just mention this and take it one step further. I've had a number of residents and a number of property owners approach me saying, what is going on with the city's building department? And I keep telling them that the relationship with the building department has improved significantly in the last 2 years. But with this, I guess I also want to know, because I want to know if there's any other downtown property owners that start their projects without getting the applicable permits, which then forces the city in a position of having to either stop work or get with the property owners, and then we always become the bad guy, okay? Because people are not following the rules and regulations. This is a classic example. So I'm recommending to council can proceed how it wants. I will not be supporting, I like the development agreement with Mr. Wickenheiser, because I think we need to clarify with him his plans and the type of code that we're going to follow in the rehabilitation of his building. But since he started work without getting the certificate, we are, basically the state act says, you have to state in writing, no work will happen until you get your certificate. He started work, in my opinion, I'll ask the attorney, he is not eligible for an OPRA at this point in time.
Councilman, could you give me just the section that you were referencing? I'm looking at the statute myself right now.
MCL 125.2788, Section 8, 2D.
So while he looks that up, because I have some comments as well. Councilman Felder?
While the city attorney looks that up, I think I have a broader comment on the OPRA process as well for the city. I think that the Economic Development Review Committee set the ceilings and the amounts of investment that have to happen for each level of tax abatement for each of the years. And I think there was some discussion at the last meeting that we thought that those were a little too modest. I was wondering if they had been reassessed or if we had raised them at all, because due to the number of jobs created, I think is what brought us to the 6-year agreement instead of the full 12. And I'm just wondering if we've adjusted those at all per this agreement that may not give the full 6-year allowance.
Your Honor, if I may, just in response, we have not met subsequently to look at amending the matrix that was used for this particular recommendation at this point. If we do, when we do, we obviously will bring it back to council for further consideration and discussion.
So I think a part of that discussion came to be the matrix that was presented to council here was presented to the Economic Review Committee. And in the application, that was a discussion both at the committee and here at council, was originally submitted at $50,000. And as it came back, and I said, is that factual number or is it just to put on paper to get started? And as it came back, and what we saw at the last one was $160,000 investment, which changed where it would fall within the matrix. And I think, Councilman, that's where if you want to say, as you said, modestly approved, I think it was the jobs, but also the amount of the investment. And that matrix that was in the last, discussed the last meeting, would have shifted that to other years beyond the 6. But that's still up to council. The recommendation is still the same as it came from the committee, but it also, the council has the ability to go beyond that if so wished.
Do we require any sort of verification or estimates from contractors that amount of investment will actually occur? Or is it sort of like, well, what amount do you want it to be? And that's what I'll write in on the application.
It's that it was done for that reason, because the question was written first, is that just seemed odd, $50,000. And so as it went back through, there was a description of the work. I'd have to see if Mr. Green has any additional information on that, but I'm looking at Vincent.
Well, Your
if
Honor,
you know.
Your Honor, what would normally happen if they followed the state statute is he would prepare his plans by an architect. They would submit the plans to the building department. The building department and the applicant would agree on the scope of work and how much it's going to cost. And then it's that cost then that goes to the Economic Development Review Committee that they can use to evaluate it. But when you are doing this backwards, then how do you know if the number is the right number? Okay.
Councilman Lamore has a question also, but I think we have an answer here. We'll get the answer from the attorney and then come back and
Yeah, I
see
was
what's
I was waiting for the answer from Matt.
Butts.
Your Honor, the section that the councilman referred to has several provisions that say that a qualified local governmental unit should not approve an application unless the following are met. And one of those is that the commencement of the rehabilitation does not occur before the establishment of the Oprah district. And I think our district would have been in existence for some time. So I think that provision would be met in 2A. In 2B, it states that the application relates to a rehabilitation program that, when completed, constitutes a rehabilitated facility within the meaning of the act and would be situated within an obsolete property rehabilitation district, which again, I think that likely this applies and meets that standard. C, completion of the rehabilitated facility is calculated to and will, at the time of the issuance of the certificate, have the reasonable likelihood to increase commercial activity and do a number of other things. And I think that's one where we start to get to more of a gray area of how do you evaluate that if work has already started when you look at the time of the issuance of the certificate. And then subsection D, which now states that the applicant states in writing that the rehabilitation of the facility would not be undertaken without the applicant's receipt of the exemption certificate. And I think, to the councilman's point, we likely have, I will say it's not necessarily one where I'd say it's a clear black and white prohibition that it cannot proceed, but there's probably a question for the council to weigh and determine whether the rehabilitation of the facility would or would not be undertaken without the applicant's receipt of that certificate, if in fact there's been the start of some work already at this point in time.
Mr. Presto, do you have a follow-up?
I think part of it is just there's some, I'm going to bring to you some mitigating circumstances related also to the application. While this has been frustrating from an administrative standpoint, the application, I think, was submitted many months ago and basically at my direction told the department to sit on it until we resolve this other matter. And so in fairness to the applicant, their application was out there several months ago, and we've subsequently resolved the other matter that we had, I'm sure the council's familiar with. So, but the application was there much earlier, and then there's, certainly I think from a follow-up standpoint, the HDC didn't particularly, as Mr. Green had explained to me, didn't necessarily have any issue with it, but just wanted some more information to help, with that decision. So.
I'll go to Councilman Lamore, then Councilwoman Viney, and I have a comment also.
Yeah, I'm kind of confused. I mean, it sounds like it's more of a, and I'm not nothing against Councilman Michaelangeli, but it sounds like it's more of a technicality on the issue. Am I correct in saying that, where you're stating that he applied, obviously applied for it, but you're saying because it wasn't approved, you're saying we should not allow him to have the Oprah?
The way that I read the intent of the state statute, I refer to it, this type of statute, as a but for.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why you want the Oprah is because you need the tax abatement to make the building financially feasible. So if you already start renovation of the building, then you basically have already indicated that financial feasibility isn't an issue. So, I think under that section 8.2D, where he did not state in writing that he was going to withhold work until the issuance of the exemption certificate. I think based on my interpretation on that is that he basically shut himself out of the Oprah.
Well, there's another way of looking at that as well, is because the city manager has stated that that's been kind of sat on for 2 months, if I'm correct in stating that. So with that being said, I mean, that's kind of a long time to wait to start moving the process forward. That's not something that I think that we want in the city to happen frequently, where we have people just waiting for us to give approval to get their building going.
But Your Honor, the reason why that city manager said, let's hold on this application, is because we were in mediation with Mr. Wickenheiser on another project relative to what code was going to be used to interpret what he had to do. Okay? And that's what this development agreement tried to clean up, is that we'd all agree on what code was going to be used, but it's like he went ahead and started construction. I'm just uncomfortable with it. Like I said, I appreciate the fact that he's invested a lot in several buildings in the downtown, but, you know, I think we need to follow procedures as well. But that's my
Councilman Vining, you have a comment?
I was just curious, was the applicant aware of that he might be risking getting this contract if he put the windows in, or if we're doing it backwards, whose fault is it that?
I couldn't tell you what consideration went with putting the windows in before getting the final approval.
Would he have, Your Honor, would he have needed a permit to put the windows in?
Yes.
And we gave him that permit?
So a question on the agreement first, and then maybe some comments about the process, which didn't work well here in many circumstances, I believe. So looking at the development agreement, and as I read through it, here it talks about review of the Planning, Building Department, Historic District Commission. And as you get to the second page on the Historic District, it says, the approval of the Historic District Commission shall be obtained prior to commencement of the redevelopment. So my question is, one says review and one says approval. Is the HDC an approving board or a recommending board, commission, I should say?
It is a recommending board. Jeff, Mr. Green, if you want to, and that.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Jeffrey Green, Director of Community Development. In this particular case, and this is prior to us receiving the development agreement, what we were looking for was a recommendation from the Historic District Commission as to the project. As Mr. Pastu indicated, the HDC was generally supportive of the idea of rehabilitating this building. I don't think anyone was against that idea of getting that back on the tax rolls, doing something with the building that has sent pretty much vacant for the last number of years. What they came back from, what the recommendation was from my department, and the recommendation that the HDC made was for additional information about the type of windows that were going to go in the building, what was the material to go in, and a number of things that they typically will look at. Also, there was proposed a front porch to be added onto that. And I think we've had this conversation a number of times over the years when we've had historic projects coming back, and it's not just simply putting something on the front of the building, but something that complements a historic building. That's typically what we're looking for. Not saying that you can't do it, but we want to make sure that it does complement that building. And also was an ADA accessible ramp that was discussed in throughout the application process. At that point, the recommendation from the HDC was that more information be provided. I did send that to Mr. Wickenheiser the following day. And by that point, some of the windows were already in the building that following day. And that's where we ended up doing some contact with him. And again, we did notify Mr. Wickenheiser, hoping that he would be able to make it to the HDC meeting. And my explanation to him was I think he would be able to explain particular products he wanted to use. He's done a number of buildings in the downtown, as Councilman Iko Angeli has indicated, and hoping that he would be there to be able to explain why he was using a particular project in this case. Maybe he found out it was a great product, and it looks very nice when you drive by it right now. But again, the HDC was simply asking for additional information, and we have not yet received that information.
I don't know if you have the answer or Mr. Pastu has the answer. The information that's being asked for, was that provided to the building department and the windows and the type of windows and the context of which it would be?
The permit application did come in, and we've had it for not a long period of time. But what they were looking for was the U factor, basically its energy efficiency, which they're required to follow, which is I believe, a federal regulation for windows. They did not have that. And then by this point, what they were waiting for also was the review by the EDRC and ultimately the city council. So they have been talking with him. They've been wanting to get the permit done. But again, it kind of falls in this gray area now that we're kind of waiting and seeing if this recommendation, the tax exempt certification, is going to be approved or not. But again, I don't believe, I believe he's ready to get, they're ready to issue the permit, but have not at this point, I believe.
Maybe I didn't ask the question right. Was the information regarding the windows provided to the building department at the time that the application was submitted? Was that information in there that could have been utilized, or was it held because the permit wasn't issued yet?
They did have some information. We received some information to the Historic District Commission about the windows. Essentially what it said in the cut sheet that we received about the windows, they were a vinyl window. It did not indicate a U factor in there, and that's what the building department was looking for. And I seem to not be answering
No,
your
you
question.
answered the question. I find it frustrating that if we get information that's not sufficient, that we don't get the information before it's moved forward for the next review. Mr. Pastu.
Oh, I was just going to add, I just commented, you seemed exasperated that we weren't, if we weren't answering your question. I just wanted to make sure we were getting to the essence of it.
I think it is, but I guess I'll make some comments. So, it's, years go past and we hear various comments about the building department. I think there has been changes, there has been improvements, but I also wonder is it because of the person? Is it because there's a challenge with the builder that another one doesn't get through? But I like to think that we have to process things in a fashion that's going to make it move forward versus not having answers. So I'm going to go back for a second before I forget, because I know that I think I have the answer. So the approval of the Historic Commission probably isn't the correct word in there. Recommendations.
I would agree, Your Honor. I would say review and recommendation.
So,
Your Honor, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
That's what we did ask from the Historic District Commission, was a recommendation. I think that's what City Council asked for when it was postponed, was a recommendation from the Historic District Commission. That's what I explained to them they were looking for, or you would be looking for, in a recommendation back.
So I think the review by the HDC is important, and I think that the review and recommendation is important as well. But it just seems that in this case, things are stalling or not getting in a fashion that fits everybody's needs. And then it comes to us now in this fashion, and obviously there's work that's been done, and now we're saying, well, because that's done, we're not going to do this. And I'm just trying to figure out, where is it that we didn't get to yes in this project? Because I think that's what the intent, and I think that's where we were getting to with the building department is, getting to yes with the support needed to get something completed, as opposed to trying to let somebody figure it out, I guess. I don't know where we are anymore now.
And if I might, one of the things that we've changed in the building department is that for projects, especially projects in the downtown, is that we will assign an inspector who stays with that project throughout the life of that project as it goes forward from permit and application on through completion. We had one of our inspectors working on that. He had been in contact with Mr. Wickenheiser a number of times throughout this process. So again, we're trying to keep up. I had emailed Mr. Wickenheiser a couple of different times regarding the upcoming HDC meeting, the EDRC meeting as well. And again, we unfortunately did not see him at either of those meetings.
Your Honor. I have a quick question for Jeff. Jeff, Mr. Green, has the building department received a complete set of construction drawings for this project?
I believe they have. I think there were some changes following when the council postponed this project, and it came back. We had actually a revised application, which was for a $160,000 investment, requesting 12-year tax exemption. At that point, what also came back was that there was no longer going to be a residential component to this development, but rather the upper floor would now be used as commercial space. So that was slightly a change, and I think they were waiting for those drawings to be finalized and come back. And again, the inspector that was handling this project had communicated with Mr. Wickenheiser, asking that, to please forward those drawings along as soon as you get them completed. And then evidently, Mr. Wickenheiser indicated that he was working on them, so.
So they haven't been completed?
So as I don't think they have at this point, as of the last few days, but they were in communication, which is, for me, is good. And I think we are trying to, as the mayor has indicated, we're trying to move forward with this, and we're not trying to hold these projects up. But, again, we have made a number of efforts to reach out to Mr. Wickenheiser and, and trying to complete this project, making sure that it goes forward. But, again, one of the requests was for additional information, and unfortunately did not receive that as of this point.
Councilwoman Germaini.
Is there a time limit for this development agreement to go into effect?
I would leave that to the attorney.
Your Honor, I don't believe there's any time limit for the development agreement to be finalized. I will say we received the amended application for the Oprah in, I think, either the last days of October or the first few days of November. I can't remember the exact date. But there would normally be 60 days to review that, so we're within that time period for doing that. I don't think there's anything wrong with having an agreement of this fashion, and I certainly would support Councilman Icoangeli's suggestion that this should be something of a standard procedure for dealing with these kind of tax incentives. As far as this particular situation, I guess I'll say my overall viewpoint is there are certainly things where this got off the rails in terms of the way we'd ideally like to see it. And there's also, I guess I'll say merit to this building getting back into productive use. And that's certainly been things that were discussed, I think, at the HDC and communicated to Mr. Wickenheiser. I know he obviously has his frustrations with dealing with the building department. It's one of those where if there's a path forward to have this building get renovated, I certainly, my own two views, not a legal opinion, but that certainly, would be consistent with the purposes here. And I think this agreement was drafted in an effort to try to clarify as much as possible, put together some parameters and say how things will proceed with these type of tax incentives and developments.
But we don't have all the pieces to the puzzle, correct?
Not at this point.
I think Mayor, if I may, just,
Costa.
echo city attorney's comments of how we can get this thing moving forward. I do think it's a good project. It's a building that's sat idle for years. And again, we've, have our ongoing challenges with the applicant and the building department, probably fault to be found everywhere. But it is in the best interest of the community to try and move this forward. I do believe the way that city attorney Buds drafted this development agreement, it does put the onus on the applicant to follow through on what's contained therein to move this forward. And I think in many ways it puts the ball in their court to do that. There's some things with the city attorney was showing me part of the statute, whether there's a temporary type of or emergency type of repair that needs to be done. Certainly in the context of windows and the time of the year, there's probably a certain urgency that may go along with that. But at any rate, I do think it's a good project. And if there's a way we can find our way to get it resolved and moving forward. But the development or the agreement would put the onus on the applicant to address those issues. So.
I guess my last question is, with this rehabilitation project that's going on with that facility, is there I'll just say a redevelopment or use intended that if, that, I won't say doesn't depend on what decision's making, but is that going to go forward? Do we know?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, is the development project that's associated that's going to go forward or not? Dependent on this.
That I don't know. I would think it would. It does have an impact and a benefit of it, but I couldn't tell you definitively one way or the other.
After I asked it, I realized there's probably not an answer, so I apologize.
Yeah, just on number 4, do we have to change that from approval to recommendation?
My recommendation, if this was going to be approved, or at least if council would entertain using this form of agreement. The other thing is that Mr. Wickenheiser has not seen this draft, so part of this would need to be generally having council's approval for this type of form of agreement and then present it to him. And that may be one way where some of these questions are answered and we know, whether the project will proceed based on the general spirit of what's described in this development agreement, if that's acceptable to council.
Councilman Felder.
Thank you, Your Honor. I believe that in the development agreement itself, under the permit section, it states that the company is going to achieve all relevant permits prior to work. If this was adopted now, I believe that the company would be in violation of it. And of course, we have terms of what happens in that violation, in which case we get to go back and review the status of their tax exemption status. So if we approve this now, I think that the process that you've already laid out gives us a second chance to review the exemption status that we'd be giving them in the agreement. Provided they have in fact violated the permitting section of the agreement that we'd be voting on.
Your Honor, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Bud.
So this was drafted not with a pre-thought of work having been done prior to the commencement of this. I drafted this with the idea of it proceeding more along the lines of what I'll say a traditional way that this would go. Certainly, I think that there is a very good argument that could be made that if this agreement were signed in its present existing format, that the developer would immediately be in default for not obtaining permits prior to the commencement of certain work. Do I expect that potentially we would have back and forth about the terms of this agreement? I think that that's possible, but I think that that's also true. If it were signed in the fashion that it is now, there would be an argument that the city could say, all right, you haven't, met your part, and give the notice under Section 8 to review and potentially revoke that OPRA if, in fact, it were ultimately granted by the State Tax Commission.
Other questions or comments from council? Mr. Green, yes, I'm sorry. Apologize.
And what I want to really stress is that the building department is not involved in the giving the tax certifications. That's not our bailiwick. I think they were at one point looking for that decision and also looking for the HDC to give a recommendation back. That's typical with any project located in a National Register district at this point in time. They will either approach staff or the HDC for a recommendation as required by ordinance. It's also with any historic locally designated historic district where they would not issue a building permit until there was approval and review by the HDC. But again, they are not in the business of giving these certificates. Their job is to make sure that they have the information they needed. If I could, I'd like to read just a short email. This is from our inspector, Lauren Bennis, who's been working on that project. It's to Mr. Wickenheiser. This was dated November 25th of this year. Good morning, sir. Have you heard anything from your architect yet regarding new plans for 101 West First Street regarding the permit application? Let me know ASAP so that we can process your application for the building permit. It's been in our file since April and has been considered several times. There has been no new submission since May 24th, 2019. Our last discussion on April 30th, 2019 indicated that there was not going to be any residential in the building. So again, the building department is continually following up with the applicant, trying to find out, well, okay, we've had a change in here. This is what we need to have those revised plans to us so that we can get this done and get it reviewed. And I think that has been their position. They have had continual contact throughout. Are they talking with them on a daily basis? No, but they are following up on a periodic basis as they kind of see this project coming forward or no movement on it. And as I indicated, we have tried to assign inspectors to handle specific projects and follow them through so that we don't have that drop or that gap between one inspector and another looking at a project.
Other comments, questions from council? Councilman Moore.
Your Honor, correct me if I'm wrong, if he signs this agreement, he more than likely is in violation of the agreement. So why would he sign the agreement if he's going to be in violation of it? A, and what incentive does he have to sign the agreement, really, when you think about it? At this time and point, if it's gonna be in violation, there's no sense. It's pretty much done and over with.
I think if I may, from his end of it, and if there's a understanding that, follow through on the information to the HDC, you know, that, this thing could proceed forward. I mean, that's an alternative, even though the contract language may say it's in violation, but, whether it's enforced or we have an understanding that, we could potentially move forward with it, that would be his benefit to carry forward with it.
Your Honor.
Councilman Michelangelo.
I have one more question for Mr. Green. I didn't see in our packet a couple weeks ago, whenever we had this the first time, did, the application that he submits for an Oprah, is that a city application or is that a state form?
That is a state form.
And on that state form, does it indicate anywhere that you do not start any work until that application is approved?
I would have to look. And I can look that up shortly and give you that answer, but I don't know off the top of my head if it's in the very small print. I was looking for our attorney, but like I said, I don't know off the top of my head.
You're already,
Your Honor, I'm looking at the form as we speak here.
I have the application that he submitted.
Yeah, I
So,
don't-
and as Mr. Buds continues to look, because I'm not the attorney, he is, but the application, and there's a lot of fine print here. On the second page, under resolutions, it said, statement of the commencement of the rehabilitation of the facility did not occur before the establishment of the obsolete property rehabilitation district. I think it's probably the same language that was read before. And the second part, I think, says the same as district at the end. But I'm gonna let Mr. Buds read it from what he has.
I would agree, Your Honor. I mean, the statement and the one that I know is an absolute issue is that the commencement of the rehabilitation cannot occur before the establishment of the district. Here we have the district already in place, so that's one where I think there's the potential, at least, for a path forward here. The provision that we were looking at before is, okay, would this occur, the project occur notwithstanding having the Oprah certificate? And that's the one where I think it's more of a gray question, and you would have to, I mean, I think in some ways has the opportunity to at least look more at intent and the statement of, all right, if Mr. Wickenheiser would show up here and would say, I'm going to, stop doing anything else on this project because if I don't get this Oprah certificate, this doesn't make financial sense. Can he accurately make the statement that the, project will not continue except for having that Oprah certificate? I think that's an open question. If I were to make a recommendation, it would be that we provide, if council is generally comfortable with this development agreement, which I will say, stepping back and looking more in a vacuum, this general form applying for future Oprah certificates, I think we take this to him and say, this is the general form that we would normally use. We have a situation here where some things have already commenced. What would be kind of his proposal in terms of how to handle the situation now to bring back to council at the next meeting? That still puts us within the 60 days and, may give us a path forward. Again, I don't know that there's a certainty there, but there's at least a dialogue that could occur if that type of discussion were to move forward.
Councilman Felder.
Does by and large have a responsibility to try and develop or incentivize development in the downtown and in the city broadly. I think that in response to Councilman Lamore's question about the purpose of the document, if it's in violation, I think that Article 3 is as important as Article 1, in the document where we establish what code we're going to use, because we've had a disagreement with the developer about that in the past as well. And if we weren't going to follow that, it would have other financial impacts on the project. So even without the tax incentives, I think that moving forward in some manner or another is still important. The process perhaps has not been followed in this one. I don't want to stand in the way of development, but in this particular case, I feel like someone's beat us up and tried to take our lunch money. So whether or not we do the tax incentives, but I'd like to view those as two separate issues. And one I think is worthwhile doing in either case to try and help develop the downtown. I don't know the feelings of the rest of council. And I'd like to move forward at least with that one if we can't get the Oprah agreement settled.
I think the whole purpose of the development agreement was to solidify as part of the Oprah request what the responsibilities were between the applicant and the city. And unfortunately, Mr. Wickenheiser has kind of went off on his own and started the revitalization of the building without having recommendation from the HDC, without having the certificate approved by the council. And now the council's in a position, like we always are, trying to play catch up with public relations, that we're the mean people, when in effect, we have an applicant that hasn't followed any of the requirements. He hasn't submitted full set of construction drawings. He didn't show up at the HDC to go over what he wanted to do with the building. Mr. Green said he didn't show up at the Economic Development Review Committee. I have to tell you that if I was asking the city for a major tax break on my property, and this is not insignificant, the first thing I would do is make sure that I showed up at the Economic Development Review Committee to talk to him about my project. We're going to forego tens of thousands of dollars in taxes, and the gentleman that's requesting it is not showing up and is not providing the city with the required amount of information. But then yet we feel bad because we're withholding an Oprah request. I just don't get it. I really don't. I really just don't get it.
Well, I guess my comment is I want things to move forward. I think that's the conversation we had the last time this came around, is like, let's turn the page and move forward. And here we are, we have to turn the page again because we are not getting things done in a timely fashion, period. We should be saying, how do we get to yes for these projects? And this is a case that hasn't happened. I agree. I don't like the fact that work's been done without a permit, that it's in process now. Now we have an arrangement or agreement or a development agreement here that's going to rectify future problems, but yet we have something now in the middle. It just happens to be with the same developer. As frustrated as I am, I'm sure there's frustration on both ends of this, whether it be through the building department or the developer. And so just because some things are not going the way we ideally want them to go, it frustrates me that we're not allowing a development in relation to what's been provided. And I just think that there needs to be space on both sides to get to resolution. I just don't see it.
Okay, Your Honor, I'll make a motion. My motion's very simple, that the city of Monroe will not make a final determination on an Oprah request until the developer has an acceptable development agreement with the city of Monroe.
So you want this to be reviewed? Just to make sure I understand the intent or purpose.
The intent is that the city of Monroe will consider, subject to an executed development agreement, a request for an Oprah. We get the development agreement first, then he can come here and he can talk to us about the Oprah.
So basically, you want this presented to him before the council
And
makes
get
a
it
motion.
negotiated. Then,
understand.
when it's fully executed, he comes back, the city comes back, the administration comes back, and then we talk about the number of years that we're going to grant, if any.
Okay. The clerk's writing down, because I know that you presented as a motion, and Councilwoman,
Over it again.
okay.
Your Honor, I'll make a motion that the city will withhold the Oprah request until such time that we have an executed development agreement between the applicant and the city of Monroe.
Point of inquiry.
Councilwoman Vining had her hand up first, and then I'll come back to you. Your motion's still on the table.
Just for clarity, because I'm confused. So the developer hasn't been presented with this development agreement. So if he hasn't been presented with this development agreement, is there another agreement that he's in violation of by doing the windows? Because is he in violation if we never made an agreement with him? Other than you shouldn't be putting windows in without a permit, period, but.
Yes, Mr. Buds.
The statement that I was making about that is, this agreement states that the developer would obtain all necessary permits for the work prior to the commencement of any work. So if this agreement were to be signed, everyone were to agree to it, and I would also question whether it would ever be agreeable in the form that it is now, which is why I said it was done under the premise of there hadn't been work done. This was sort of the form of what I was suggesting we use in the regular course. Then it's signed, the city would have the right, I think, day one to say, well, wait a second, you did work without a permit, so you're now automatically in default of this. It's why I expect there will be more dialogue in this particular situation, but I don't necessarily have, from a legal perspective, any problem with the councilman's motion of present this for discussion, and we'll see what we get back for the next meeting.
I'll go ahead, Councilwoman.
I guess I'm confused, like Mr. Lamore said, as to why we would present an agreement to someone that we wanted to make them in violation of the agreement.
Right. So I think, I'm just going to make a comment here, not speak for Mr. Buds, but in Councilman's motion, I think, is to make sure, or to get that in place before it comes back, and there's approval by the council on the Oprah, which I understand.
That makes sense. And also with the, when I hear the $160,000 investment up against the 6-year tax abatement, I think that is, I'd like to see how we're going to look at that matrix as well.
Okay. Councilman Felder, and there's still the motion on the table looking for a second, but Councilman Felder had a
Just to
comment.
clarify that the councilman's motion assumes that a new development agreement will come before council without the Oprah attachment. That's my understanding.
That there will be that there's a development agreement that'll be negotiated between the two parties, yes.
And then there'll be a follow-up submission back to the council regarding
Okay.
the Oprah, which is what's in front of us. But I'm looking at Mr. Buds, and then I'll look at Mr. Councilman Lamore has a comment.
Yeah, just make sure we have that change in there from approval to recommendation from the Historic District Review.
And just so that I have kind of the council viewpoint in mind, the idea would be take this development agreement to the developer, say, here's what has been approved generally as something that the council has the general framework of. I would anticipate we're going to have certain back and forth regarding that, and then I would likely anticipate, hopefully for the next council meeting, here's a development agreement that is generally acceptable to the administration and to the developer, and also pair that with, if that is finalized and agreed, then the Oprah could conditionally be approved at that point in time also as sort of a package deal.
Yes, we would then discuss how many years we're going to give for the Oprah.
Which gets to Councilman Viney's question of the review on the amount plus the number of jobs on the matrix that was presented to council by staff.
Yep.
Okay. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
The motion by Councilman Nicolangi, supported by Councilwoman Germaini. Any clarification needed? And clerk, do you need any clarification on the motion?
No, I think we're good. Yeah, we have it.
Please call the roll.
Councilperson Felder?
Yes.
Whitman?
Yes.
Ike
Yes.
Vining?
Yes.
Germaini?
Yes.
Lamore?
Yes.
Mayor Clark?
Yes. Clerk, next item, please.
The next item is the consent agenda, and for item B, approval of payments to vendors, the amount should read $605,632.65, 605,632.65.
Thank you. We need a motion for the consent agenda.
Your Honor, make a motion that we approve the consent agenda as written, all the actions carried out, and all of the actions recorded by the clerk.
Motion by Councilman Moore, supported by Councilwoman Germaini, that the items on the consent agenda be accepted as presented. Clerk, Please call the roll.
Councilperson Felder?
Yes.
Whitman? Michael Angeli? Vining? Jermaine?
Yes.
Lamore?
Yes.
Mayor Clark?
Yes. Well, next item on the agenda is council comments. But before that, I know that Captain Dickerson is here from Monroe Police Department. Just a comment from the police department. I'll say not necessarily an update as much as comment regarding pending item.
Mayor, members of council, Captain Dickerson, Monroe Police Department. I've been asked to step forward to give you a brief update regarding the officer-involved shooting that occurred at 739 Washington 2 weeks ago on November 19th. Information is very limited per protocols involving a shooting. The investigation's been turned over to Michigan State Police, and their investigation is still ongoing at this time. The officers involved in the shooting are resting well, and every day gets better. Also in regards to this is that there's been there's been a lot of well wishes come from the public, and it's deeply appreciated by the Monroe Police Department. We'd like to thank the community for their continued support in this matter. Now, that all being said, as the information becomes available to us and more updates are available, we'll bring that to you as well.
Very good. Thank you, Captain. Councilman Felder.
Thank you, Your
It's
Honor.
December.
Yeah, we've made it to 12. Certainly, our thoughts are with the families of all those involved in the officer-involved shooting, and certainly well wishes for all those injured to hope that they recover. It is certainly around Thanksgiving a time for family, and I hope that everyone was able to see their family, maybe come in from out of town. I hope that you guys had a good time. Thank you to the firefighters for putting on the event out of Oaks of Righteous, or the VFW, I think it was this year. Oaks of Righteousness, yeah.
Mhm.
I was
Yep.
unable to make it this
That's
year.
correct.
I was below the weather, so. Thank you all. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Thank you. Councilwoman Whitman.
Yes, I would also like to thank the firemen. I ladled gravy till my arm was wore out, and it took about 15 minutes. So, but it was wonderful. Created community and a good atmosphere. I saw a lot of people I hadn't seen in a while. I really enjoyed doing it, and next year I'm going to do the cranberry sauce because nobody eats it. So. But I hope that everyone enjoyed their Thanksgiving, and as far as the building on at 101 East First, I really wish we could get this together to where that when, a project like this comes up, and I realize that we have contractors that have been working for years and working with the building department, and they're set in their ways, but it's a good thing for the community. So I hope that we can work this out and make it happen. So, and that's all that I have. Thank you.
Councilman Angeli.
Yeah, Your Honor, I'd like to thank the fire department for doing the annual Thanksgiving dinner. Nicely done. Also wanted to congratulate, and I'm sure we'll have something for them, SMCC, regarding the football championship and regarding the girls volleyball championship. I think both the young men and women at St. Mary's Catholic Central have done an outstanding job of representing this community. And I want to, and I'm sure we all will, express our appreciation and our well wishes for them. That's all I have, Your Honor.
Thank you. Councilwoman Vining.
Your Honor, I'd like to thank the firefighters as well. I usually work when you guys have the event, but I was able to stop by and speak with a few of the volunteers, and it seemed like a beautiful turnout. So thank you guys. And also, I'd like to congratulate publicly Pastor Heather Boone of the Oaks of Righteousness Church for being appointed to the Monroe Public Schools Board of Education. So that's exciting, and hopefully she'll bring some needed diversity, compassion, and just a different outlook to the board. So I just wanted to publicly congratulate her on that appointment. And that's all I have, Your Honor.
Thank you. Councilwoman Germaini.
I want to thank all of the first responders for working together on that date of 11/19. Everybody worked really well together, and I know it was a bad day for everybody, but everybody responded really well, and the community is still outpouring. And with the tree lighting, I had to work that night, but on my way home, I stopped at a restaurant. All the restaurants were packed in Monroe. The city was packed with families, and it was just put a big smile on my face to drive by and see all the crowds down the street, waiting for the tree lighting to be lit. It warms my heart. So I'm anxious to see the next parade that we're going to be having on the 14th, to see how excited. That one I will be able to go to. That's all. Thank you.
Honor. Thank you. Certainly, as Councilman Michelangelo alluded to, I certainly want to congratulate SMCC's volleyball and football state title teams. Fantastic job bringing all that back to Monroe. But prior to CC's football championship, we had our great Monroe High School band participating in the Great Thanksgiving Parade in downtown Detroit. If anybody had a chance to see that, they performed admirably and really made me proud to be a part of Monroe just by them being there. Thank you to the firemen for hosting that Thanksgiving dinner and providing so many meals, and well wishes to our police family. And that's it, Your Honor.
Thank you. I have a few comments. I'll start with the thanks also. The fire department and their annual dinner they provide and help serving. And I think about all the employees within city government, and they all find their path and niche of how they support this community. I know there's one that's currently with the members here in City Hall, an adoptive family that was mentioned earlier of that opportunity the fire department is doing. The employees here in City Hall do the same. It's just, we have a great giving community, but we also have great giving employees here with the city of Monroe, and find their abilities to help others. The SMCC, what a great outcome for the women's volleyball and the men's football team there to win state championships. And Mr. Pastu and I were speaking earlier before the meeting today about looking at our calendar and making that invite to have them come in and be recognized, not just by council, but all that are here, but also with their families to come and to be show their achievements by all the efforts they've had for those state championships. The tree lighting, I did have a comment about that. It was a very good turnout downtown. I think that not only after the tree lighting, but before, the restaurants, some of the partners I want to thank, of course, Allen Chevrolet was a great partner on this, and I just want to say thanks to them publicly for their support to get us to be able to have some of the activities over there. The Monroe County Museum opened their doors. They had activities going on, but they partnered in the discussions and helped distribute some of the giveaways, which made it a very busy night for them as well. But I was talking every day, it seems I run into somebody that talks about that, and one morning at breakfast, the employee from the Dorsch Library saw me come over. We were talking about it. They said they had over 900 plus visitors into the Dorsch Library that night. And you think about the activities and the youth, and it's just a great opportunity for partnership. I want to thank all those that were sponsors, our participants, including our employees that helped with that for a great night for the tree lighting. The MCOP Mr. grant that was on tonight's agenda, I know Stephanie was here earlier, but from all that are helping with that to find revenues the best we can. We had that discussion in the work session earlier, so every grant opportunity that we can fill is wonderful. My last comment's some sad news. A friend, but also a friend of the city, with the city of Trenton's mayor, passed away over the holiday late Thursday evening. So, Mayor Kylie Stack, she had she was starting her third term as mayor, but she had 43 years of service for the city of Trenton as a clerk before that. So it's definitely a loss when you talk about municipal leadership and participation. She was very much involved with SEMCOG as well as the Michigan Municipal League. So our thoughts go out to her family and a loss within our leadership of government here, not in Michigan and Southeast Michigan. I think that's my comments for this evening. Clerk Treasurer LaVoy.
Well, going last, a lot of times my list has already been checked off. So I guess with regard to the youth and their successes, the band and the young athletes that we have, it's just a reminder to me that we need to keep going and keep pushing, because these young people, those we know about, those we haven't heard from yet but will, we want them to stay here and we want them to continue to make this area better. So to me, it's just another reminder that we have promises to keep for those young people. Additionally, I did want to thank the firemen. It was another great event at the Oaks, and Councilman Whitman, I was given gravy duty after you, and I didn't do so well with it, so I moved on to potatoes. You might want to check that one out next year. Other than that, we've got some new things happening with our vendor for credit card payments, and we're going to be getting out some information. We had a soft launch with that, and we're getting a lot of information about the 2020 March presidential primary, and so we'll be beginning to disseminate that information to residents as well. That's all.
Before I go to the city manager, Captain Dickerson gave us a brief review. I know that talking with Chief McCormick, he's thankful for the outreach from the council, all the members within our city employment, as well as the community, on their thoughts and well concerns regarding our police family and mine as well. City manager.
I don't have anything to add, Your Honor. Thank you, though.
Thank you. This time, any citizens' comments? Any further comments from those present here this evening? We have a motion.
Your Honor.
Yes, Councilman Lamore.
I move that we go into closed session to discuss the matters of pending litigation involving the following parties. 1, Stacy Hall. 2, a number of plaintiffs having filed similar lawsuits consolidated under the lead case involving Tracy Mix Harms. And 3, Leslie Poppy.
Motion by Councilman Lamore, supported by Councilwoman Germaini, to go into closed executive session regarding items stated. Clerk, please call the roll.
Yep.
Michelangeli? Yes. Vining?
Yes.
Germaini?
Yes.
Lamore?
Yes.
Mayor Clark?
Yes.